When you think about your relationship with God, does it feel more like labor? Something you do, produce, maintain? Or does it feel like companionship? Something you live from? Has the weight of it ever felt like something you were carrying alone? Not because you weren't devoted enough, not because you weren't trying hard enough, just alone. Under something heavy with no one else's hand on it. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Is there a difference between doing something for someone and doing it with them? Think of someone you know well, a parent, a spouse, a close friend. Doing the dishes for them while they're out of the room, that's one kind of act. Doing the dishes with them, talking, laughing, in no hurry, that's a completely different experience. Same task, entirely different weight. Now hold that up against whatever you've been calling your spiritual life. Because I think most of us were handed the first version and told it was the whole of what God wanted. Welcome back to Inside Out, a podcast about encountering the reality behind the religion. If you're new here, this episode's part of a 12-episode series on transformation, real transformation, at the level of belief, not behavior. If you've been with me from episode 1, you know we've been building something. We diagnosed the wheel, we named the lie, we looked honestly at the evidence, we confronted the distorted image of God most of us have been reacting to. Last episode, we found out what the floor is made of. Love. Not as a mood God has, but as what God is. Agape. Essential nature, not attribute. This episode is the natural next question. If that's the floor, if the ground under everything is unconditional, unearned love, then what does it actually look like to live on it? Not to believe it, not to affirm it in a doctrinal statement, to live on it. Because here's what I've noticed in myself and in nearly everyone I've talked to who's been sincerely trying to follow Jesus for any length of time. You can believe the floor is grace and still be building your whole house like it's still a construction project you're personally responsible for finishing. There's a version of following Jesus that looks, from the outside, like full commitment, and from the inside, like permanent exhaustion. You do the things you're supposed to do. You serve, you give, you pray, you read, you show up. You carry all of it with genuine intention, and somewhere in the middle of carrying it, you start to wonder whether this is what he actually meant. Whether the weight is normal, whether the fatigue accumulating underneath everything is just the cost of discipleship, or a sign that something's wrong with how you're doing it. This segment is for that person. And here's the honest answer. Something is wrong. Not with your sincerity, with the architecture. You've been carrying a yoke that was built for two, alone. In Matthew 11, Jesus is speaking to a crowd that knows exactly what that kind of weariness feels like. People bent under religious law, requirements they couldn't meet, a system that promised nearness to God and produced exhaustion instead. Here's what he says to them in the literal standard version. Come to me, all you laboring and burdened ones, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke on you and learn from me. because I am meek and humble in heart, and you will find rest to your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Verses 28 through 30. The image is agricultural, exact, on purpose. A yoke is a shared instrument, a wooden frame laid across the necks of two animals, so the weight of the load gets distributed between them. Nobody wears a yoke alone. That's not what it's for. The Greek word here for yoke is Zugos. It means a tool of partnership, not a tool of burden. When an experienced animal is paired with a younger one under the same Zugos, the stronger one carries the greater share of the load, while the younger one learns the pace, the rhythm, the way. That's not a metaphor for barely adequate assistance. It's a picture of apprenticeship at the most intimate level there is. Teacher and student under the same beam. The teacher pulling more, the student learning what pulling even means. Jesus says his yoke is easy, not because the work is trivial, because he's doing the heavy part. What he's actually asking from you isn't production, it's presence. There's a second image Jesus uses, and it makes the same claim from a completely different angle. In John 15, Jesus says he's the vine, and the people following him are the branches. Then he gives the governing principle of the entire relationship in a single sentence. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who is remaining in me, and I in him, this one bears much fruit, because apart from me, you are not able to do anything. Verse 5. Apart from me, not able to do anything. That's not pessimism about human capacity. It's a description of the design. A branch doesn't produce fruit by effort. It produces fruit by staying attached. The life flows from the vine. The branch's entire job is to remain. The Greek word for that is meno, and it means to stay with, to take up residence, to remain in continuous connection, not to visit occasionally, but to actually live there. Not to work for the vine, to remain in it. Paul names the lived reality of this arrangement in Galatians 2:20. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. He's not describing the dissolution of a person. He's describing a transfer of the load-bearing center. The person still lives, but the source they're living from, the engine of the whole operation, is no longer their own striving self. It's Christ, operating in and through them by the Spirit. Galatians 5:25 puts it as an instruction. Since we live by the Spirit let us also be guided. Not by the flesh, not by accumulated effort, by the one who was given specifically to empower what you were never going to produce on your own. Here's the distinction stated plainly. The difference between living for God and living with God is not a difference of devotion. The for God person and the with God person can be equally sincere, equally willing to sacrifice, equally devoted by any outward measure you'd use. The difference is in Who's doing the load-bearing work? The for God person produces. They generate output through effort and offer it upward, hoping it's enough. The with God person receives. They stay connected to the source of life and trust that what flows through that connection produces what's actually needed. One of those leads to the weariness Jesus names in Matthew 11. The other leads to the rest he's actually offering. For the exhausted believer listening to this, you've been carrying the yoke alone. That's not a verdict on your faithfulness. It may be the most faithful thing you've ever done. It's a verdict on the architecture. Jesus built the yoke for two. If it's been crushing you, that's not evidence you're weak. It's evidence you've been doing solo what was always meant to be shared. For the person who's watched that kind of exhausted devotion from the outside and kept yourself distant, the version of following Jesus you saw wasn't what he was describing. He wasn't offering enlistment. He was offering companionship, a shared yoke, not a heavier one. If that's a different picture than the one you walked away from, it might be worth looking at again. We've used the same 4 steps throughout this series. Believe, ask, look, fix your gaze. Today we're aiming them at one specific thing, the place you've been carrying alone. If you're driving or somewhere you can't close your eyes, stay with me anyway. Just let your attention shift inward while your physical eyes stay where they need to be. Set aside the next 10 to 15 minutes if you can. If you can't right now, just come back to this. Jesus is with you right now, not watching from a distance, waiting to see if you will manage on your own. Already in the yoke, already carrying the greater share. Let that be true before you move to the next step. Now ask, Jesus, show me where I have been carrying this alone. Then, with the eyes of your heart, look for him. Notice where he is. Notice what he's doing. Don't direct it. Don't manufacture an answer. Just look. Once you see or sense where his presence is in relation to you, fix your attention there. Stay with him. Don't pull back into analysis. Notice what it feels like to have him already there, already pulling, in the place you thought you were alone. When you're ready, take a breath and come back slowly. Before anything else, write down what arrived, whatever it was. Don't evaluate whether it was significant enough. Just capture it. The invitation hasn't changed since he first extended it. The yoke is still there. He is still in it. The question was never whether you're devoted enough to carry more. It's whether you'll get in alongside him, not as a heavier commitment, but as a lighter one. Not more effort, a different kind entirely. Not producing for him from a distance, walking with him under the same beam at his pace. Next episode, we follow this further. If life with God is relational instead of transactional, if the yoke is shared and the vine does the producing, then what's actually happening when Jesus becomes visible to you in that 4-step practice we keep doing? What is that faculty, and why did God design you with it? I'll see you there.